Growing up in the Williams household meant understanding your place in the family hierarchy. My older sister Rachel was the golden child. Law degree from Yale, corporate attorney at a prestigious firm, married to a surgeon. My younger brother David followed close behind with his MBA from Wharton and his consulting job that took him to exciting cities around the world. Then there was me, Sarah, the middle child who chose architecture over law, creativity over corporate climbing, and independence over family approval. Architecture is a nice hobby, Dad would tell his friends at country club gatherings, but Sarah needs to think about financial security. Mom would nod sympathetically as if my career choice was a phase I'd eventually outgrow when reality set in. They meant well in their way, but their version of love came wrapped in constant reminders of my limitations. The family narrative was set early and repeated often. Rachel was the brilliant one, David was the ambitious one, and I was the artistic one, which in family code meant impractical and destined for financial struggle. Every holiday dinner included subtle updates on Rachel's latest court victories or David's international business deals, while my architectural projects were dismissed with polite interest and quick subject changes. When I graduated from architecture school 8 years ago, the family's reaction was predictably lukewarm. "Very nice, dear," Mom had said, "but when will you start looking for a real job?" The fact that I'd been hired by a respected firm in Boston apparently didn't qualify as employment in their eyes. Real jobs, according to family wisdom, came with guaranteed salaries and clear advancement paths, not the uncertainty of creative fields. My relationship with architectural development had begun during my first year at the firm, when I'd proposed an innovative approach to adaptive reuse projects. Instead of simply designing buildings for other people to construct, what if architects took ownership of the entire development process? My supervisor had laughed at the suggestion, but something about the idea wouldn't let go of me. I started small, investing my modest salary into a rundown warehouse in a transitioning neighborhood. Working nights and weekends, I transformed it into loft apartments that sold for 3 times my initial investment. The family barely noticed, too focused on Rachel's partnership track and David's promotion to senior consultant. The second project was larger, a defunct textile factory that I converted into mixed-use commercial space. By the time I finished, I discovered something the family had never suspected. I wasn't just good at architecture, I was exceptional at the business side of development. While they worried about my financial stability, I was quietly building a portfolio that would have impressed even David's MBA professors. 5 years ago, I took the biggest risk of my career. A struggling event venue in the suburbs was facing bankruptcy, and the location was perfect. Historic charm with modern accessibility, surrounded by mature landscaping and convenient to major highways. The asking price was steep, but I could see its potential in ways the previous owners never had. "You're buying what?" Mom had asked when I mentioned the purchase over Sunday dinner. "Sarah, that's a huge financial commitment. Are you sure you can handle something that complicated?" "Event planning isn't architecture," Dad added helpfully. "You don't have any experience in hospitality management." I'd smiled and agreed that it was a learning experience, which seemed to satisfy their need to express concern while maintaining plausible deniability about supporting my choices. What I didn't mention was that I'd spent 2 years researching the industry, consulting with event planners, and developing renovation plans that would transform the property into something unprecedented in the region. The renovation took 18 months and every dollar I'd earned from previous projects. I gutted the interior, redesigned the floor plan, added state-of-the-art lighting and sound systems, and created outdoor ceremony spaces that took advantage of the property's natural beauty. When I was finished, Willowbrook Estate wasn't just an event venue, it was a destination. The first wedding I hosted exceeded every expectation. The couple had chosen my venue over 3 other high-end locations, specifically because of the architectural details and innovative design features I'd incorporated. Their photographer called it the most beautiful wedding venue they'd worked with in 15 years. Within 6 months, I was booking events 2 years in advance. But success in the events industry requires discretion. Clients expect their special days to feel unique and personal, not like commercial transactions. I kept a low profile, reinvesting profits into property improvements and expanding my development portfolio. To my family, I was still Sarah the architect who'd bought some old building as a side project. The venue's reputation grew quietly but steadily. Wedding magazines featured the property in several articles, always focusing on the architectural elements and design innovation. Industry professionals started referring clients specifically to Willowbrook Estate, knowing the quality of service and attention to detail they could expect. I hired a small but exceptional staff, each person chosen for their commitment to creating perfect events for our clients. By last year, Willowbrook Estate was generating more revenue annually than both Rachel's law practice and David's consulting salary combined. But the family still saw me as their impractical artist, the one who needed gentle guidance about financial responsibility and career planning. When I got engaged to Michael 6 months ago, their concern reached new heights. Michael is a photographer, creative, talented, and in their minds, another person without reliable income or business sense. The engagement announcement dinner became an intervention about realistic expectations and modest wedding planning. You'll want to keep things simple, Mom had advised. Nothing too elaborate or expensive. Michael seems lovely, but two artists planning a wedding. She'd left the sentence hanging, the implications clear. There are beautiful community centers that rent for very reasonable rates, Dad added. Much more practical than those fancy venues that cost a fortune. Rachel, ever helpful, had researched budget wedding options and printed out a list of affordable alternatives. Some of these places are quite nice, she'd assured me, and they understand couples on limited budgets. I'd thanked them for their concern and promised to be financially responsible, which seemed to ease their worry without committing to anything specific. The truth was, I'd already been planning my wedding venue for years. Not the celebration itself, but the space where it would happen. Willowbrook Estate hadn't just been a business investment. It had been designed with the dream of hosting my own wedding someday. Michael understood the family dynamics without needing detailed explanations. As a photographer, he'd worked at dozens of wedding venues and immediately recognized the quality and uniqueness of Willowbrook Estate when I first brought him to see the property. "This place is incredible," he'd said, wandering through the gardens and main hall. "Whoever designed this really understood how events flow through space." I'd smiled without mentioning that the designer was standing next to him. Planning our wedding became a careful balance between creating the celebration we wanted and managing family expectations. I arranged vendor meetings at neutral locations, handled most details through email and phone calls, and kept conversations with my parents focused on guest lists and menu preferences rather than budgets and logistics. 2 months before the wedding, Mom asked the question I'd been expecting. "Sarah, have you actually seen this venue you've chosen? We should probably do a walkthrough to make sure it's appropriate." "Of course," I'd replied. "I can arrange a tour anytime you'd like." We scheduled the visit for a Saturday morning when the venue had no events booked. I arrived early to ensure everything was perfect. Gardens immaculately maintained, interior spaces spotlessly clean, and all the architectural details I'd spent years perfecting displayed to their best advantage. Mom and Dad pulled into the circular driveway exactly on time, their expressions already showing concern as they took in the property's scope and obvious quality. This was clearly more elaborate than the community center receptions they'd been envisioning. "Sarah," Mom said as we walked toward the entrance, "this looks very expensive. Are you sure this is within your budget?" "The grounds are beautiful," Dad added, "but places like this usually charge premium rates. You don't want to start your marriage in debt over one day." I led them through the main entrance into the grand foyer, where afternoon sunlight streamed through the custom stained glass windows I'd designed specifically to create dramatic lighting effects for wedding photography. The space was breathtaking: soaring ceilings, original hardwood floors restored to perfection, and architectural details that balanced historic charm with modern elegance. Mom stopped walking and stared. "Sarah, this is gorgeous, but it must cost a fortune. How can you possibly afford something like this?" Before I could respond, we were joined by Jennifer, my venue coordinator, who'd been handling client inquiries in the office. "Good afternoon," Jennifer said, approaching with professional warmth. "You must be Sarah's parents. I'm Jennifer, the venue coordinator here at Willowbrook Estate." "It's beautiful," Mom said, still looking around with obvious concern, "but we're worried about costs. Sarah and Michael are both in creative fields, and venue fees for places like this can be." "This place is too expensive for you," Mom declared, turning to me with parental authority. "Sarah, be realistic about what you can actually afford." Dad stepped forward supportively. "Find somewhere you can actually afford. There are lovely places that won't put you in financial jeopardy." I nodded calmly, accustomed to their protective concern. I understand completely. Jennifer looked confused by the conversation, consulting the folder in her hands. Ms. Williams, shall we finalize your ownership renovations for the bridal suite? The contractors are waiting for approval on the marble selections. Mom's jaw dropped open. The color drained from Dad's face. Ownership renovations? Mom repeated weakly. Jennifer realized her mistake immediately. Oh my. I'm so sorry, Ms. Williams. I assumed. She looked between my parents and me, clearly flustered. Would you prefer to discuss this privately? The silence stretched across the foyer like a held breath. Dad was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, confusion mixed with something approaching awe. Mom appeared to be struggling with basic comprehension. Sarah, Dad finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, what did she mean by ownership renovations? I took a deep breath, knowing that the carefully maintained family narrative was about to shatter completely. I own Willowbrook Estate, Dad. I bought it 5 years ago, designed the renovations and built it into one of the premier wedding venues in New England. You own this? Mom asked, gesturing at the soaring architecture around us. This entire property? All 47 acres, yes. The main building, the gardens, the chapel, the reception halls, and the bridal facilities. I designed most of the renovations myself and oversaw the construction. Jennifer, still clutching her folder, added helpfully, Ms. Williams is actually one of our region's most innovative architectural developers. Willowbrook Estate has been featured in several wedding magazines and architectural journals. We host over 200 events per year. The number seemed to hit Dad with physical force. 200 events per year, at venue rental rates he was only beginning to calculate, represented revenue streams that dwarfed his own successful accounting practice. But how did you afford? He started, then stopped, realizing the question revealed how fundamentally he'd misunderstood my financial situation. The architectural firm was just my starting point, I explained. I've been developing properties for 8 years now. Willowbrook Estate is my flagship property, but I have residential and commercial projects throughout New England. Mom sat down heavily in one of the antique chairs I'd carefully restored for the foyer. Sarah, why didn't you tell us any of this? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications none of us were quite ready to address directly. Why hadn't I told them? Because every family gathering included reminders about my impracticality and financial limitations. Because their love came wrapped in assumptions about my capabilities that I'd grown tired of challenging. I tried to mention projects over the years, I said gently. But the family was always focused on Rachel's legal career and David's consulting success. My work seemed less important. Dad was walking through the space now, his accountant's eye taking in details he'd missed during his initial concern about costs. Original crown molding restored to museum quality. Custom millwork that would have cost more than most people's cars. Lighting systems that created architectural drama while remaining invisible to guests. This renovation must have cost millions, he said, running his hand along a restored banister. 2.7 million, I confirmed. But the property's current valuation is over 8 million, and annual revenue covers all operating costs plus reinvestment in improvements. Jennifer nodded enthusiastically. Ms. Williams has created something truly special here. Couples book our venue specifically because of the architectural innovation and attention to detail. We have a waiting list for prime dates that extends 3 years out. Mom looked up from her chair, tears forming in her eyes. Sarah, I don't understand. If you've been this successful, why did you let us think you were struggling financially? The question pierced deeper than she probably intended. How do you explain to loving parents that their concern had become a barrier to sharing success? That their protective instincts had created a dynamic where achievements felt like corrections to their judgment rather than celebrations to be shared? I never wanted to make you feel bad, I said honestly. You meant well with the advice about financial security and practical careers. It was easier to let you worry than to make you feel foolish for worrying. Dad shook his head slowly. We weren't worried because we thought you were foolish, Sarah. We were worried because we love you and wanted you to be secure. But you were secure, Mom added, her voice filled with wonder. More than secure. You were building an empire while we fretted about your career choices. Jennifer cleared her throat diplomatically. Should we continue the tour? The ceremony spaces are really spectacular, especially the outdoor pavilion Ms. Williams designed for sunset weddings. We spent the next 2 hours walking through property I'd transformed from a failing event space into what industry professionals called the gold standard for wedding venues in New England. Every detail reflected years of careful planning, substantial investment, and architectural expertise that my parents were seeing for the first time. The outdoor ceremony area featured a custom-designed pavilion that provided weather protection without blocking natural light. The reception hall incorporated sound engineering that allowed conversation at normal volumes even with a full band playing. The bridal suite included luxury amenities that justified premium pricing while creating an experience clients remembered forever. "The gardens are extraordinary," Mom said as we walked through landscaping that had taken 3 years to mature into the lush backdrop I'd envisioned. "Sarah, you designed all of this?" The landscaping was collaborative with a specialist firm, but the architectural elements and overall layout were my design, yes. Dad stopped at the outdoor bar area, studying the stonework that seamlessly blended historic elements with modern functionality. "This level of craftsmanship. Sarah, you're not just successful, you're exceptional at this." The comment hit me unexpectedly hard. In 32 years, I couldn't remember either parent using the word exceptional to describe anything I'd accomplished. Talented maybe. Creative certainly. But exceptional implied a level of recognition I'd never received from my family. As we completed the tour, I watched my parents process information that fundamentally changed how they understood my life. The daughter they'd worried about for financial security owned property worth millions. The impractical artist had built a business that generated more annual revenue than both her siblings' careers combined. The family member who needed guidance about realistic expectations had created something that industry professionals sought to emulate. "Sarah," Mom said as we returned to the main foyer, "I owe you an enormous apology. We've been treating you like a child who needed protection from financial reality when you'd already mastered business complexities that are far beyond what your father and I understand." "It's not about apologies," I replied. "You were being loving parents. But maybe now you understand why Michael and I aren't worried about wedding costs." Dad laughed, a sound that mixed embarrassment with genuine admiration. "Wedding costs. We came here worried about you overspending on a venue rental and you own the venue." Sarah, the irony is almost painful. Jennifer, who'd been discreetly managing several phone calls during our tour, approached with her folder again. "Ms. Williams, I don't mean to interrupt, but we have 3 couples scheduled for consultations this afternoon, and the florist needs approval on the arrangements for next weekend's event." The mention of ongoing business operations seemed to crystallize something for my parents. This wasn't just an impressive property I'd purchased. It was an active, thriving enterprise that required constant management and decision-making. "You should handle your business," Mom said. "We've taken enough of your time and we have a lot to process from this morning." As they prepared to leave, Dad pulled me aside. "Sarah, I need to ask you something and I want an honest answer. When we gave you advice about practical career choices and financial security, did that hurt you?" The question was harder to answer than I'd expected. It hurt because it felt like you couldn't see what I was actually accomplishing. But I also understood that you were trying to protect me from disappointment. Your intentions were always loving. "But our assumptions were completely wrong," he said. "We protected you from financial struggles you'd already overcome while missing the success you'd achieved. The success wouldn't have been possible without the work ethic and values you taught me," I replied. "You gave me the tools to build this, even if you didn't recognize the building when it was finished." Mom hugged me tightly before they left. "We're proud of you, Sarah. Not just the business success, but the grace with which you've handled our misunderstanding. A lesser person would have thrown this in our faces years ago." After they left, I stood in the foyer of the venue I'd created, processing the morning's revelations. Jennifer approached cautiously, clearly concerned about the family dynamics she'd accidentally exposed. "I'm so sorry about mentioning the renovations," she said. "I had no idea your parents didn't know about your ownership." "It's fine," I assured her. "Actually, it's better than fine. It was time they knew." That evening, Michael called to check on the venue tour. How did they react to Willowbrook Estate? Shock initially. Then embarrassment about their assumptions. But ultimately, I think they're genuinely proud once they understood what I'd built. "And how do you feel about them knowing?" The question made me consider emotions I'd been avoiding for years. Relieved mostly. It was exhausting pretending to be less successful than I actually am. But also sad that it took so long for them to see me clearly. They see you now, Michael pointed out. And they're going to see you walk down the aisle at the venue you designed and built. That's pretty spectacular, Sarah. 2 days later, Rachel called with a reaction that was quintessentially her. Mom told me about Willowbrook Estate. Sarah, why didn't you ever mention that you're apparently some kind of real estate mogul? It never came up in conversation, I said mildly. It never came up? You own a multimillion-dollar business and it never came up? Sarah, I've been giving you career advice for years when you were already more successful than I am. Your career advice was well-intentioned, I replied, enjoying Rachel's dismay more than I probably should have. David's reaction is even better, she continued. He spent 20 minutes calculating your probable annual revenue and then just sat there saying, "Holy shit," over and over. Mom had to tell him to watch his language. The family dinner the following Sunday had a completely different dynamic. Instead of updates on Rachel's cases and David's consulting projects, conversation focused on my upcoming wedding and business developments at Willowbrook Estate. Dad asked detailed questions about development financing and construction management. Mom wanted to know about client relations and event coordination. I keep thinking about all the times we worried about your financial future, Mom said during dessert. Sarah, you must have wanted to laugh at our concern. I never wanted to laugh, I said honestly. Your concern came from love, even when it was based on misunderstanding. But I'm glad you know the truth now. David, still processing the revelation about my success, asked the question that had been hovering over family conversations all week. Sarah, are you angry with us for not taking you seriously all these years? The question deserved careful consideration. I'm not angry, but I am sad that it took so long for you to see what I was capable of accomplishing. Family support would have meant a lot during the years when I was building this business. You have our support now, Dad said firmly. Whatever you need for the wedding or future projects, just ask. Actually, I replied, what I need most is for you to trust that Michael and I can make good decisions about our life together. The wedding will be beautiful, our finances are solid, and we're both excited about the future. Mom smiled, her expression that mixed maternal love with newfound respect. I think we can manage that. The wedding itself, 3 months later, exceeded every expectation I'd harbored during years of planning. The ceremony took place in the outdoor pavilion at sunset, with light filtering through the trees in ways I'd specifically designed the space to capture. Michael's photography colleagues described it as the most photogenic venue they'd ever worked with. Our guests marveled at architectural details that told the story of my professional evolution while creating an unforgettable celebration. Rachel's maid of honor speech included a confession. I spent years giving Sarah advice about practical career choices when she was already building something more impressive than anything the rest of us have accomplished. Tonight, we're celebrating in the venue she designed and built, surrounded by gardens she planned, in a business she created from vision and determination. Sarah, we're proud of you and we're sorry it took us so long to understand what you were achieving. Dad's father of the bride toast was even more emotional. Sarah taught me that success doesn't always look the way we expect it to. While we worried about her financial security, she was creating financial independence. While we encouraged practical choices, she was building something that combines art, business, and innovation in ways we never imagined. Tonight, we celebrate not just her marriage to Michael, but the extraordinary woman she's become despite our inability to recognize her achievements. As Michael and I danced our first dance in the reception hall I'd designed specifically to create perfect acoustics and romantic lighting, I felt the satisfaction of sharing my world with family who finally understood what they were seeing. The venue wasn't just the setting for our wedding, it was the physical manifestation of everything I'd worked to build. The tangible proof that their impractical daughter had become a woman who turned creative vision into successful reality. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around us, Michael pulled me aside. How does it feel to have your family finally understand who you really are? I looked around the space I'd created, the architectural details that showcased years of expertise, the business systems that generated substantial revenue, the client relationships that had built a reputation extending far beyond New England. It feels like coming home, I said. Not to the venue but to being seen clearly by people I love. The venue I'd built for my wedding had become something more valuable than real estate or business success. It had become the place where my family finally understood that their practical daughter was actually the most accomplished entrepreneur among them, hidden in plain sight for years. And as our guests danced late into the night in the reception hall I'd designed, I realized that the most successful development project I'd ever completed wasn't a building at all. It was the careful construction of a life that honored both my creative vision and my family's love, even when those seemed impossibly far apart.